I'm Rachel Littman, Saybrook College, class of 91, the outgoing executive director of YANA. I want to thank you all for coming. For those of you who were here last night, I hope you had a great time. It was a wonderful energy, a great event, and we expect today to be as wonderful as well. We have a terrific lineup for you. We're going to have open plenary sessions, and then you'll see the other panels. We'll close up those doors, so make sure, and I'll announce, and Merle and the other one will announce when we're ready to start for the individual panels in the rooms. Don't worry if you can't be in two places at once. We're going to be video recording everything. We'll make them available, so if you want to pick one and you really wanted to be in both, you'll be able to watch them later, so no problem. Thank you again to all of our sponsors, to our board members, to our planning committee. Has made both last night and today just it's going to be a terrific event. Don't forget to bid on the auction or to donate. If you haven't done it, there are QR codes everywhere. We're still fundraising for our general operations and our budget. We love to be able to put on events like this. Obviously, you know, as nonprofits, you got to get the money in so we can continue to execute on our mission. So please support us if you can. There's some great things. I know Ken and I are getting bid up, so if you want to have dinner or lunch with us, act quickly. It's a hot ticket. I think that's all we have for now. There are people with volunteer tags. If you have any questions floating, we can help you. Hopefully all of our speakers have a little speaker tag and you got your water bottle. Everyone else, feel free to snag us if you have any questions, but have a great conference. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Ken and Adomi, our board chair, who will introduce our speakers for the morning. Thank you very much for coming.
Good morning, everyone. You know, Rachel glossed over last night. We had 4 honorees that, as I said last night, 4 stars in the Yale constellation, and Rachel Littman is one of them. Since 2019, she's been the executive director of YANA. She's taken us to new heights. The impact under her in terms of a global network now of over 8,000 alums, family and friends, all committed to making a difference in the world. So how about a big hand for Rachel? Okay, so today we're going to lead off with a fireside chat with Tom Steyer, who will be speaking to Lauren Graham. I mean, how often do we get the former captain of the Yale soccer team to talk to us? But obviously, Lauren's going to introduce Tom. I want to introduce Lauren. Lauren Graham has a bachelor's undergrad from Stanford and a master's degree from the Yale School of the Environment. For someone of her relatively young age, she's incredibly accomplished across the Yale landscape. She's been on the Yale Board of Governors. She's been the chair of Yale Blue-Green. She's, I believe, the youngest recipient of the Yale Medal. She was on the Alumni Task Force of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that Cheryl and I co-chaired. She's just always been a doer and an active participant. And when we thought about who could engage Tom in a meaningful way, Lauren was actually the first name that crossed our minds. So how about a big hand for Lauren and Tom?
So I'd like to just do a quick rapid fire of some of the fantastic accomplishments of my fellow Yalie here. So Tom Steyer is the founder of Farallon Capital and most recently the co-executive chair of Galvanize Climate Solutions, a 2020 presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, and the funder of multiple centers and institutes for clean energy at our alma maters, Yale and Stanford. And with his wife, Kat Taylor, also signed the Giving Pledge. So with that, please welcome me in introducing Tom Steyer. Okay, Tom, so after a very successful career in finance, you could have dedicated your time and your resources to absolutely any cause. Why choose to focus on environment and nonprofits and politics?
Well, why did I choose to make that choice? I don't think I made that choice, to be honest. I think that choice was made for me in the sense of looking around the world. Look, I'm an investor in many, many ways. I went to Stanford Business School. I spent over 30 years as a professional investor. I'm a professional investor now. And basically all that means is you basically look at the data and think about the future and try and project what's going to happen. And it turns out not everybody thinks about the world that way. Like, I did think everybody thought about the world that way. But they, when I was talking to political people, one of them once said, "Why do you keep trying to figure out the future?" And I said, well, so that you avoid the bad things and emphasize the good things. That's why you think about the future. And she said, no, that's stupid. What you do politically is you wait for things to happen and then you rush over and show sympathy. And I was like, okay, that is a terrible idea. That is the dumbest way of thinking. But she was looking at me like, you, sir, are an idiot. Why would I think about the environment? Look, probably the biggest influence on my life was my mom. And my mom was a complete social justice person. She lived in New York. She ran school volunteer programs. She taught in the prisons. She was, every human being counts the same, and we need to help the people who need the help. And that's what she spent her life doing. So I have not missed that point. But if you look into the future and think about where we're going and what's going to impact the most people in the deepest possible way, which was what I was trying to do, I was looking at it and going like, wow, everybody's going to be hit by this. The most vulnerable are going to be hit the most. The people who have done the least to cause the environmental degradation and destruction are going to suffer the most. It's absolutely connected. And just to give you one, a third of Pakistan was misplaced by floods. Pakistan as a country had produced 1/10% of the greenhouse gas emissions. That is not a fluke. That is where we're going. The most vulnerable, the least guilty will suffer the most. And I felt like, okay, here we go. I left, I became a full-time climate advocate when I was 55, and I just felt like enough years to try and make a difference for the thing that I think will hopefully avoid the most suffering that I can think of, human suffering.
Thanks, Tom. So you touched on it a little bit, but it seems like you can't talk about climate justice or talk about the future of the planet under climate change without talking about racial justice. So how do the two things intersect? And in what space should nonprofits really think about that climate justice lens, even if their work is not specifically focused on climate?
So one of the things in the sort of climate movement, environmental movement, which, by the way, is a very elite movement, it traditionally has been a very well-educated, well-to-do, somewhat removed from the hurly-burly of life movement. And one of the things that they discovered, shockingly, is that it's actually about human beings. So the idea, people use the words environmental justice, and sometimes I use them too, but to be fair, this is about human beings. So the idea that you'd solve a problem about human beings without involving human beings seems, illogical. And it's also, what I always say is, well, first of all, if you want the right policy, you have to ask the people who are most affected. And they can't just be a consultant or someone who you bring along after you come up with your answer. They have to be leadership in the movement, designing the policies, because to a very large extent, you're going to get the wrong policy unless the people who are most affected are absolutely central to designing it. But it's also true. So from a sort of get the right answer question, it has to be much more broad-based. But from the standpoint of getting it done, this is a human issue that is reliant on human cooperation and input. So the idea that you wouldn't involve people broadly, if you think about the environmental movement, they've done a bunch of really great stuff. So and they've been ahead of the game, and they're thinking about the right things, yada, yada, yada. I don't mean to say anything snotty. But the truth is, I'll tell you a story. So I was hiking in the Adirondacks the year I graduated from Yale with a Yaley who will go unnamed for obvious reasons when I tell this story. So we're hiking, and she was an environmental lawyer. Very, high grades at Yale, working for a great organization, doing really, really well. And I said, do you think you know more about the environment than most people? And she goes, absolutely. And I said, do you think that gives you the right to design the policies for what to do about the environment? And she goes, absolutely. And I said, well, let me tell you something. Everyone thinks you think that way, and they don't like it. And so when we think about this, in the US, in California, 2.2 million people have asthma. They're overwhelmingly people who live in low-income neighborhoods where there are bad plants and where the freeway goes by, and a bunch of them are kids, and the freeway can go right by schools, and it's lousy, but it's also completely disproportionate. So when we think about how to solve these problems and what the right thing to do is, it is absolutely critical that everybody be involved. And just so you know, if you were to do a poll of people in the United States, and I want to talk about global, but in the United States, the people who care the most about the environment and climate, Latinos, by far.
Yep.
Number 2, African Americans. Number 3, Asian Americans. The people who bring up the rear are white people. And that actually makes sense if you think about it, if you just do the political crosstabs, because a lot of them are Republicans. And so if you think who cares about the environment, it is not what people think. It is a much different group of people who vote, care, think, act. And if you look at the world, the global north, global south divide on climate and the environment is really steep, and people are really angry. If you think about those numbers from Pakistan, think if you were from Pakistan, you would think, my God, we're all dispossessed by something we had nothing to do with. And now you guys want us to change the way we, develop, because you want us to save you from your problem. The problem, not your problem, but the problem you create. Mm-hmm. So when we think about this, the idea that this isn't a human problem, what will actually determine how we do on this is how much we cooperate and how much we fight. So when we think about what's going on in 24, and I hate to say it, but when we think about the elections, the question is, are we going to be part of a cooperative world that answers this together, or are we going to be feuding warlords around the world? Because that definitely doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tom. That's a good transition into the
Longer
next
answer
question.
than you wanted, Lauren. I
Oh, no,
apologize.
I love it. I'm a professor. I love a long answer. Just to mention something, since you were talking about the statistics, for those who aren't familiar, the Yale program on climate change communication and their 6 America survey is fantastic data, really up to date about what people really think about climate and where they sit on the spectrum of, oh, this is not happening, it's not going to affect me, to people like us in the room, active, engaged, and trying to make a difference to create a more sustainable planet. But to transition to what you were talking about around this sort of feuding warlord situation, that's dysfunction. And the dysfunction that we're seeing in Washington has soured a lot of Americans on politics, on voting and our democratic system, and really depleted the trust that they have in the belief that government can make their life better. So as someone who has experience in the private sector and now heavily in the public service and nonprofit space, do you see a path forward to restore faith in government and really support the basics of civic engagement?
So there is no way I'm sitting in this room and saying no, just to be clear. So what I'd say in 2013, so I left being an investor at the end of 2012, and I started something called Next Gen America, which was built and is the biggest organization in America to basically register and engage young people in politics. And the reason for that was that people under 35 were then and are now the largest age group, the most numerous group of people in the United States, the most diverse generation in American history by far, and the most progressive group of people in America, and they voted at half the rate of other Americans. So if we want to have a representative democracy, it's really important that they vote. And selfishly, on my case, if the things I believe in are going to be supported, we really need them to vote because they are the swing vote. Mm-hmm. And we thought that at the time, and that is not how people thought about it at the time. At the time, people thought the job of politics is to convince a suburban mother in Milwaukee to flip from supporting Donald Trump to supporting Joe Biden. I ask all of you guys, have you ever convinced someone on the other side to change? It's very unlikely in this United States. But if the largest group of people in the United States and the most progressive group votes at half the rate of other Americans, all you have to convince them to do is show up at the polls. All you have to convince them is that voting matters, their vote matters, they can take control. And so, that's what we've spent the last 11 years doing. And you can, if you're a data-driven person, you can look and see turnout. When young people vote, Democrats win. And that's period. And there's some very bright lines, but that generation is overwhelmingly progressive and blue. Every single state, Utah, Mississippi, every single state under 35 is blue. And it's a question really of turnout and what you can do to get people to the polls, which is it's a hell of a lot easier to get somebody to the polls than to get someone to give up on Donald Trump. And so we've done that for 10 years, and now if you read the political press, I mean, I don't think I'm objective about this because I have a dog in the fight, but I would say when I read the political press, all I see every single day is stories about youth voting, which were never around. And the people in the Democratic Party who 10 years ago were telling us, you're brain dead, you have no idea what you're doing, we're the pros, are now saying, we really need, up and down the line, we need youth turnout, how are we going to do this, blah, 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 blah.
So are there any specific races that you're really following around that intersection of climate, voting, pro-democracy work?
Well, it's funny. So I know everybody in this room knows this. But the United States, the way that we're gerrymandered as a country, there are only a few states that swing this country. And they're the same states. And so if you look, people, if you look at 2020, I think Trump lost by 7 million votes. He got creamed. But the Electoral College, I think we won by 44,000 votes. Yeah. Like you could look at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and go like, oh my God. I mean, it was razor thin. If you'll remember, the original returns made it seem like we'd lose. Yep. And so it is, whenever you see the polls, and the polls year out are dumb, honestly. They're not predictive at all. If you go back to history and see where people were a year out, it's not predictive. But are there places we focus? Yeah, we focus on those 6 states. Like if it's not a swing state, we don't go there. And we do it in this funny way. So one of the things we do is we have 2,500 influencers. So as I like to say, we have the best Latina rapper in Milwaukee. Now, do any of you guys follow Latina rap in Wisconsin? Low likelihood. But there are probably about 10,000 people who do, and they're probably all under the age of 35. We go to the places where we think people under the age of 35 are naturally going to be and it's, some of them are really obvious, like say campuses. But we really try to go to the places where they're going to be to engage them there. And that's what we've always tried to do. And as much, I'm a huge pusher for doing it online. Just as an example, to me, amusing example, we go to dating sites. I mean, you think you're looking for a date and suddenly you've got Next Gen America. It's like, this is not right.
There might be some business opportunity in the environmental dating space, though, putting that out there. Just something else on the voting. So if you happen to not be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a great opportunity to get environmental voters out, regardless of their party, is the Environmental Voter Project, started by Nate Stimmett, who's a Yaley. So that's another opportunity. Wherever you are, there's a way to support getting into the democratic process and getting people out to vote, which is important. So switching gears a little bit, we've been talking more about the situation in the United States, more of the domestic policy. So going to the international perspective. So next month, Dubai will host the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP28. And once again, in these climate negotiations, the world is going to be holding its breath, hoping that we come up with some kind of comprehensive climate agreement that's going to help us to drastically cut our emissions. So what specific outcomes are you looking for from the COP?
Well, if you're holding your breath, stop holding your breath. That is not going to happen. That is off the table. This COP is being run out of the United Arab Emirates, by the head of the United Arab Emirates Oil Company. And so when you think about what's necessary to have happen, one of the most critical things to have happen is for us to stop burning fossil fuels. And that is off the table for this year. And if you're following in, say, these United States, the two biggest American oil companies have spent over $110 billion in the last 2 weeks to reinvest in oil and gas for the next 20 to 30 years. So when you think about climate and you think about where we're going, there are two very distinct views of the future. I said, look, I'm an investor. I look at the future and try and figure out what's going to happen. If you go on the website of Saudi Aramco and see what they're projecting in terms of oil and gas usage in 2045 or 2050. So they're public about it. They do their projections, and they're straightforward about it. The world burns 102 million barrels of oil a day right now, just so you know. That's the number. They're projecting that we'll be burning 110 million barrels in 2045. Slightly higher, as I'm sure all Yaleys know. The UN is projecting that we'll be burning 20 million barrels, and that they will all be offset by some form of sequestration. That is a big difference. Logically, if you look at our climate systems and think that for the next 25 years, we're going to burn 110 million barrels of oil a day with a concomitant amount of natural gas, that is game over. It just is. You can look at the math and see what that means, and see what it means in terms of emissions, and see what that means in terms of parts per million, where that leaves us, how many people will have to leave their homes and their countries and find another place to live every single year, and it's not a choice, and think about where that takes us. That is not a conceivable future. So, there's this old saying, if something can't go on forever, it has to stop. That's where we are. Can't go on forever. And really, if you follow the climate statistics, and I don't know how many of you guys do, they're extremely alarming. I'll give you one more statistic. Sorry to do that, but everyone talks about 1.5 degrees Celsius. And Americans don't know. I don't think in Celsius. I think in Fahrenheit. Body temperature, 98.6. What is that in Fahrenheit? In Celsius? I have no idea. We think Fahrenheit, and that's the way we're brought up. But anyway, 1.5 C, that's the UN's number. Beyond that, we're in a lot of risk. So we should never go through 1.5 C, right? You've heard that 100 times. Whatever it means, that's their point. Last month, we were way over that. We were at least 1.75 C over pre-industrial, and the estimates are up to 1.9. So if you're holding your breath, are we ever going to go through 1.5 C? Stop holding your breath. If you look at where we are, if you look at the actual data, it's as if these guys are living in an alternative reality. Like somehow the world is just going to keep going the same way it is, and this is a sensible thing to do. But if you actually look at the world, that's not true. Am I ruining your breakfast? I actually think we're going to win this, just so you know. That's what I spend my whole time on, and I actually believe. But we're not going to win it without beating these people. I mean, if someone spends $112 billion throwing down against you, you might as well admit it. They're making a point. This is what we're doing. What do you think about it? Okay, maybe it's from playing soccer. It's like, fine, you elbow me right in the face? Dude, I'm not going to pretend you didn't do it.
No. So you've mentioned a few times that you look at the world as an investor and you're looking at the numbers. That's something that nonprofits are also being increasingly encouraged to do, to think like a business and to shift their operations and their perspective to running more like a for-profit business. So as someone with experience on both sides, do you think that this is actually wise advice, and how might that shift the way that the public views nonprofits, which is generally favorable, or just mission-driven organizations in general?
So when we talk, I mean, obviously I know I'm talking to people about nonprofits and philanthropy. And when I think about it in two ways. So I'm not going to be able to give you a good answer on this. But if I think about what my mom was doing, she was basically recruiting people to spend time one-on-one with kids who needed remedial reading, remedial math, English as a second language. And that meant one-on-one contact with another human being over an extended period of time where you're putting in your, the measure of your being to try and change the trajectory of their life. And that is a real thing. And so I never want to sound disrespectful of the people who do that in the many, many ways that they do that. And whether you're a nurse or a teacher or a firefighter or all the different things where people spend their lives directly giving themselves to help other people, I am extremely respectful and admiring of that. But when I think about the question, the way I interpret it is, okay, I absolutely respect that, and anyone who does that in the smallest way, the most direct individual way, I think is great. I think when you're trying to move society in a broad way, you have to ask yourself a different question, which is, how does it scale? And maybe it's from too much time of looking at a global problem about a global environmental destruction. But the question I ask myself is, what scales in this world? Mm-hmm. And the thing that always worries me, or the thing, I don't think it worries me, I just think it's in my mind, is the two things that scale globally in this world are government and profits. And so when I think about what I've done from a philanthropic standpoint, when I'm really trying to have societal impact, the question I ask myself is, how can I impact one of those two things for scale? So, when we did Next Gen, the idea is, look, we need to move this system, and the system itself has immense impact, and there's a flaw in it, and is there a way for us to take a relatively tiny amount of money and make the system more perfect and get young people to vote? Just get them to vote. To leverage a system that exists that has massive impact in all the issues we care about, and where there's a gigantic divide. So it's like this lever where you're trying to move a giant rock, but you can't lift the rock. You have to try and figure out some way to lever it. And so the reason I'm doing an investment business where we measure the climate impact of every investment. If it doesn't have significant climate impact, we won't do it. I used to say when it mattered, if you came into my office and said, I have 100-to-1 guaranteed return on a crypto investment, I'd say, not interested. Unless you can show me a significant climate response. I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. So when I think about nonprofits, to me the question is, I never, ever, ever want to look down on the people who are doing the day-to-day work, because that fundamentally somewhere is the center of humanity for all of us. And if you're not doing that, it's kind of, life is a lot emptier. But if we're really trying to move these massive systems, I think philanthropy can have a major impact, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves about how to use it to lever. And so, for instance, as an example, at Stanford, we started a center basically to give grants to grad students, junior professors, and professors to take their research and turn it into a company. And because we're saying, look, it's great if you come up with a new battery. Great. But if no one ever uses those batteries, it's a neat thing for you to get tenure, which I don't care about. But it's true. And so those companies are worth over $6 billion now. And did we get anything out of that other than the satisfaction of helping young people start a company from research, so brilliant young people commercializing scientific research? No. Our whole point was, let's get this into the world. Let's give you the money so you can afford to try this and see if your battery is something that actually can change the world. That's what we're trying to do. And that was the idea of use a small lever to try and push and use these big systems that actually can change, can scale, can move quickly, can actually change a worldwide problem.
So connected to scale is this important idea about impact measurement. So for anyone in the audience who's doing nonprofit work, whether it's coming from your grantors or your team internally, impact measurement is important, but it's really tricky to define. So your organization, Galvanize Climate Solutions, which is a climate-focused global investment firm delivering capital and expertise to accelerate climate solutions.
Way to go, Lauren. We should use those words.
I can read. And you recently published an impact framework. So can you tell us about how your team developed that impact framework and how you hope it can provide a blueprint to other organizations that are working in the climate space?
Yes. So let me take a step back. So Kat and I started a community bank 16 years ago, and it's dedicated to economic and racial justice and environmental sustainability. And so we wanted to measure the impact of every loan, and it turns out no one measures the impact of every loan. So we had to spend 10 years coming up with a rubric to say, okay, this is a low-income housing loan. Does that count as like economic justice or not? Well, what if it can be flipped? What if that building can be flipped to, market rate? So right now it's low-income housing, but it can be flipped to market rate at the, decision of the owner of the property. Is that loan actually economic justice, or is that just a loan? So we had a lot, and no one does this. And I was always like, that definitely counts. And the people doing the measurement were like, that definitely doesn't count. Shut up, Tom. So in Galvanize, if you think about it, there's some very specific things you can measure. So one of the things we want to do is buy buildings and get them to net zero. So you can look at a building and see, okay, what are the emissions from that building? What are the emissions under the way that we've reskinned it and put in solar and put in heat pumps? Okay, now what are the emissions? It's pretty easy to measure. I mean, you have to do calculations and yada, yada, but it's straightforward. But how about if you do an information system to try and measure the carbon footprint of factories in Vietnam? Okay.
How do you do that?
What's your measure of, how do you measure that in terms of CO2 emission reductions? So actually and it's really important to be able to do this in my mind. So we actually have hired really smart people to basically spend their time knowing that they're going to be doing estimates, knowing that the estimates will be imperfect, but also knowing that you have to have a number for people. Like one of the things that I learned, which much to my surprise, if you say to people, we're going to have a gigantic impact on employment, they go like, okay, that means nothing. If you say, we're going to create 32 jobs, they go, 32 jobs, that's something.
Yeah.
The number, people in the press, people in the world, absolutely obsess about numbers. So an ability to do it in a fair way, where you're rigorous. I mean, knowing that a lot of these impact things are somewhat amorphous and hard to define and hard to put a number on, but actually putting in a rubric so it spits out a number is critical. And it seems like it's superficial and it seems like it could be manipulative, and it could be. But the truth is, doing this in a genuine way to try and show impact and do it so people can wrap their minds around it is critical to get stuff done. And it really is, and people need it. And as much as they say they don't need it, they 100% need it. And that's my experience over 20 years, is they want the number. And so you have to be honest about it and make sure that you do the best job in terms of estimating what it is.
Great. Thank you, Tom. So a couple rapid fire questions before we transition to you, the audience, for some Q&A. What's your favorite memory from your time at Yale? Just one, only one.
I would say the thing that I enjoyed selfishly the most at Yale. So when you go through Yale and no one ever knows what you're doing, or at least no one ever knew what I was doing, and I never knew what my friends were doing. And so I go through Yale, and I think I spent a lot of time playing sports. I liked playing sports. It was really fun. And that was something I enjoyed a lot. And when I graduated from Yale, you know, you go to your college and they give you your diploma, and they say if you got any honors or what have you. And so it turned out, I did not do a good job at Yale intellectually, just so you know. But I did get high grades. And both of those things are true. I do not think I did a good job intellectually, but I did understand how to get high grades when I was at Yale University. So when I graduated from Yale, I had a friend who was on the tennis team who went to graduation who was a junior, and obviously I was a senior if I was graduating. And she turned to me and she goes, I did not realize you had a brain in your head.
Ouch.
I thought, great, I succeeded at Yale University.
Complete the sentence. The Earth is.
Under attack.
What do you look forward to the most when you start your day?
Connection. Look, to me, I mean, I'm describing a tough situation in my mind. It's a tough situation that I actually think we're going to win, and I actually think that the rate of deployment of clean tech is way faster than people know, that the technologies we're seeing are mind-blowingly wonderful, that, you know, human intelligence, human application, human determination is awesome, and we will get on top of this, and these people will lose their money, which I'm not one bit sad about. But if you're going to get up and face that every single day, the thing that makes it meaningful is human connection. If you don't have that, I don't know, you know, I don't know how anyone gets up in the morning and feels good about that day unless there's somebody to, like, seriously, and hopefully a lot of people, where you feel like, okay, that person, I get that person gets me, we're doing something together. That to me is what drives all the pleasure.
Yeah. Favorite pizza toppings?
You know, I live in California. Everything in California is insane. We're all foodies at a ridiculous level. I don't eat pizza.
You heard it here. Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Okay, worst piece of advice, I know exactly that one. When I was going to college, so I'm going to Yale, it's like the fall before I get in the car and drive to New Haven. Someone who will go unnamed said to me, look, the one thing you should know about college is you definitely should not play sports. You definitely should not play sports, but you should take a lot of LSD. And actually, he said, really mind expanding. That's how you should go through college. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that is the worst advice I've ever heard.
Name a song on your playlist.
I Say a Little Prayer for You. You
That's
guys know
on my
that song?
playlist too.
It's a great
Absolutely.
song, by the way,
There we go, yeah.
if you want to start the day off in a good way.
How should nonprofits use AI?
Look, I think AI is an incredible tool for doing a first draft of just about everything. And I think it can make all of us more effective. And, you know, it really is. And the first draft is always really hard. I mean, everybody knows that. And being able to use it for that, I think, makes you faster, better, smarter. It doesn't mean where you have to end up, but it is a way to have something to work from and feel, you know, end up with a better product.
Mm-hmm. What color is joy?
Dude, blue. Come on. Duh. That hurts.
And finally, what's your personal motto?
Leave it all on the field. That is where we are, in my opinion, as Americans. Like, going to be a rough year, and, you know, we really have to win. So I don't think there's a lot of reason to hold back this year.
Thank you, Tom, for that candid conversation.
That was good. You could sound.
So now we're going to open it up for a few minutes of audience questions. I believe we have Mike, and there are a couple hands.
Hi, so I'm an early childhood advocate, and married to an environmental advocate. So I have recently had the opportunity to be the co-chair of the Early Years Climate Action Task Force out of the Aspen Institute. And one of the things that's been fascinating to me has been the aha moment for me when I was realizing that we're using too big a discount rate on both environmental issues and early childhood issues. The future is just getting discounted at a point where people say, we'll worry about that later. So when we talk about scale, we've had an extraordinary opportunity in public funding for clean energy in the Inflation Reduction Act. And now the challenge is actually getting people to use it. And that's what we've been really struggling with is, you know, the challenge of the people who are most dispossessed from early childhood being one of those people, like child care workers whose homes are molding and flooding and overly hot. These are the people who need the money from the Inflation Reduction Act, and yet they're the hardest ones to reach. How do you think about the kind of the people part? Okay, we got billions of dollars in funding. Now we have to make it work.
You're really asking about adoption. Like, we have the technology, how are we going to get people to adopt it ubiquitously and fast? So I have a very straightforward answer on that. You know what? We should not expect people to be nice in their purchasing decisions. People like to purchase the best, cheapest thing. And when we ask them to purchase something else, they don't. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves. In order for this to happen, and it is happening, and I'm super optimistic about this, just so you know, we need to have a better, cheaper, faster product that people want, and oh, by the way, it happens to be clean. As opposed to people are going to spend an extra 10, you know, there's this concept which I absolutely reject of the green premium, like people are going to spend 10% more for a worse product to be green. No, they're not. They're absolutely not. So in answer to your question, when you think about houses, there is a new heat pump that is so cheap and saves so much money and is so easy to use that I expect it will be ubiquitous. And that it's going to be good for, and I think there are a lot of government subsidies and to make it move in fast, and the payback on it is really great, and it does sensing so you don't have to set it up and you don't have to rewire your house and go through the ducts. So it's kind of like, when I say to people, I have a very conservative friend from the Yale University who was our classmate, who was driving a very expensive Italian motor car, and he got rid of it to have a Tesla. And I said, why'd you do that? And he said, better pickup.
There you go.
Didn't do it to be nice. We're going to have to win in the marketplace. We're going to have to be able to, every time I, look, in California, just so you guys know, it's $6 gas. Every time I drive by a gas station and do not have to stop and fill up, I smile. We have to be able to show, we just won't buy $6 gas, it's just too expensive. Nope. And let me ask you this question. What is the hot internal combustion engine car in America today? I don't know.
I don't know what that is.
But I can tell you a lot of hot EVs. That's how we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to win in the marketplace, and we're going to, and we are. The adoption rates of clean electricity generation, batteries, and EVs are much faster than people understand, because we tend to think of the United States of America, and 40% of America doesn't want to buy anything clean. They'll pay extra for dirty. But if you look at the world, we're expecting 80% of car sales in 2030. So 7 years from now to do 7 years, 80% of car sales will be EVs. China is the biggest car market in the world. This year, China will be 40% EVs. And the way these adoption rates go is it's an S. You know, it's very slow, and then it goes vertical. It takes 6 years to go from 1% EVs to 10% EVs in a country. It takes 6 years to go from 10 to 80. It really does shoot up. That's what we're expecting. We have to win in the marketplace, and we can't be nice about it. We have to have better products, and they have to lose. Sorry.
follow up on that, and also to combine something you said at the very beginning and towards the end. The beginning you said something, you can't change people's minds. Later on you said at the end, what makes you get up are connections. So I want to focus on people. You talked a lot about systems and statistics and politics that determine what people believe in ultimately. And the question is just, how do you start a movement where people go away from money and greed and high prices and having to pay more and making them do things, to believing and doing what's right and thinking critically about it? This is a people's issue, not a systemic question.
Well, one of the things that is very distorting in my mind, but commonly accepted, is the idea that people do what's in their economic interest. And everybody thinks that's what people do. And it's not like people don't care about their economic interest, because obviously they do. But if you think about the Republican Party right now, what they're doing, I don't know how many times Democrats have said to me, they're acting against their own interests. Like, they need Medicare, they need Social Security. Why do they keep trying to trash Medicare and Social Security? People are not. It's not Econ 101. People don't just act, people think more broadly than just money. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about what we're trying to do, I think one of the biggest failures in terms of certainly a reaction to climate, but all of this is the meaning of life. Like, really what we're missing, and I think your question goes directly to this, is, what are we doing on this planet? What are we trying to create individually and collectively? And that's actually what people care about. Of course they need to pay the rent, have food, get health care, send their kids to school, do all that stuff. But they also want to have a meaningful life. I know I do. And I think that really the issue that we're having in the United States, which is the only place I really know anything about, is we have a group of people who've decided that they're going to burn this country down if they have to, if they don't get their way. And their way doesn't include a lot of people in this room, and probably everybody in this room. And they really mean it. And every time someone says, if you do that, you're going to burn this place down, and they go, good. And the Democrats go like, they're kidding. They can't mean that. It's like, no, they do mean that. And so the question is, what are we trying to create? And I really do feel as if the issue for us is, who are we? Like, what is it? And I'm a huge partisan American. I believe this country stands for what's right. And that includes the diversity, the acceptance, all that stuff. I believe that is what we stand for. Freedom, acceptance, and I think we should be fighting for that. And I think I think that's what we should be talking about. I think that's our value. I think we're the people in the only country in the world that can be making this claim, because 99% of us aren't indigenous. We came here. If you come here, you're an American. And that's, I really believe that if we have to get to that level where we think we're standing for something besides the highest GDP per capita. I mean, who gets up in the morning and dreams of the highest GDP per capita? That is not what people care about. People care about values and having a meaningful life, and I think that's what we should be talking about.
We have time for one last question, maybe someone towards the middle of the room. There were a couple of hands over here.
I really loved hearing your insights, especially because you come from such a unique background of someone who is very much in business and finance and has really made the change into politics and public impact. My name is Valentina Connell, and I actually work in politics, specifically in Youth Vote. But at Yale, I was a climate policy person. But what I quickly learned about climate policy from doing my research about why every single good federal climate policy bill has failed in the United States is we need politics, and that's why I got into politics. However, being a climate policy person, I'm wondering, once we get the youth vote engaged, once we get progressive people in leadership who care about the future, who care about other people, What are the policy priorities outside of new technology and advances in the market? What do you see? And it doesn't have to be a specific policy priority. I'm just interested, big picture.
Yeah.
What can we be striving for? Thank you.
The Inflation Reduction Act is a very big policy, and there have been several other, I think the Biden administration is a much under-recognized group of people. I think they've done a really good job on this, and I think they care, and I think they care in the right ways. In America, we have decided that the thing if you think about this on the highest level, all that's going on is it turned out that burning fossil fuels had an unintended consequence of heating up the atmosphere, and that we were in effect polluting without knowing. No one set out to do this. We didn't know we were doing it, and we've all done it, and we probably all do it every single day. But it turned out that there was a lot of pollution going on and no one was paying for it. And so the people who make $2 trillion a year selling oil and gas like to pollute for free because they like making $2 trillion a year. Mm-hmm. And so they will fight like crazy to make sure that they don't have to pay for their pollution, but everybody else has to pay, whether it's by losing their house or paying taxes. And that's, if you look at the subsidies of oil and gas globally, just to put a number on it, $7 trillion. If you think about what the US military does, it kind of protects oil and gas. So what can we do? Look, what we've chosen to do, if you think about we have unpaid for pollution by the polluters. That's all that's going on. It's not complicated, but they're really powerful. So the US government has chosen the only way that we can respond is by subsidizing people who don't pollute. So it's like, okay, we're not going to charge people for polluting. They're going to basically take their garbage and stick it in your yard. And we're going to say, okay, we're going to give you the money to take the garbage out of your yard. We're not going to charge them for sticking the garbage in your yard. We're just going to subsidize. And that's what the Inflation Reduction Act is. It's basically saying we're going to subsidize all the clean stuff until it's cheaper and better than the dirty stuff. So when I think about how this is going to work, first of all, you should know, rules work. Rules are ubiquitous. Companies will always say it's impossible. You're going to bankrupt us. This is absolutely unacceptable. You're communists. And once the rules are in, they obey them. And it turns out it didn't bankrupt them. It turned out it was kind of okay, but they were lying. But the issue that we have is we could solve this in the United States and we could talk about the rules for the United States. But just so you guys know, in terms of emissions, the US is 11% globally. And we're pretty comfortable that we will cut that in half. So we aren't gonna, and Europe is 7%. And if they cut it in half, that is not gonna change the outcome here. So when we think about what we need to do in the US and around the world, it's global. We have to have things that have global impact. Because if you do the math, way over 80% is not Europe or the US. So in effect, how do we end up with a cooperative international system, basically where people pay for their pollution so they stop polluting because it's too expensive to do it that way? If they paid for it, they couldn't do it. And just to put some numbers on this so you can feel better, it's about paying nothing for air pollution or climate pollution. Coal is about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Natural gas is about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Solar and wind are about 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So when people talk about it's so expensive to be clean,
it's not true.
That's complete baloney. So the next thing they say is, but it's not always sunny and the wind doesn't always blow, so what are we supposed to do? And that's not true. Just the battery stuff is down 90%. We'll have a couple battery revolutions in the next, before 2030. We will be able to go to 80, 90% on the grid with renewables comfortably. So when we look at this world, when we think about the question is, how are we going to make sure that globally we win by providing the best products and charging people for polluting? And I can think of ways to do that, I promise. But I think it is going to be this combination of we need rules that reach beyond our borders so that if you're importing stuff into the United States, in effect, we're going to measure your pollution and charge you for it. And we need to have products that win around the world. So somebody sitting in India is not going to say, I should do this to be nice to the Americans who've totally screwed up the world, but I should do this because it's a good deal for me. That is how we have to win. And we have to, and it's not that complicated to figure out the policies. In the United States, to get those policies, there is a party, just so you know, the Inflation Reduction Act. The Republicans went 0 for 250 votes. They're always talking about, we're serious about climate. It's like 0 for 250. Not that serious about climate, actually.
Well, thank you for spending your morning with us, Tom.
Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you.